I love to use existing space to work with what we have to, show people that they have something that can really work well and doesn't have to get bigger.
Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler, coming to you from Auckland in New Zealand, and I'm joined this week again by Zach Semke. How you going, Zach?
I'm well. How are you?
Pretty good. Enjoying a bit of rain here at the moment as we're recording this. It's
Same here.
Springtime, kind of sunny in the morning, rainy in the afternoon.
Yeah.
We've got with us today as well Jay Fox. How you going, Jay?
I'm doing great. It's a perfectly cloudless sky here in Asheville, North Carolina tonight.
Nice. And also welcome back to Mary James. So good to see you again, Mary.
Nice to see you, Matthew.
All right, well, we've got a really great interviewer and a name that will be familiar with many of our audience this week, Emily Mottram. But before we get into that and a little bit of background, Zach, we've got a few people to thank.
We do indeed. So a big thank you to 475 High Performance Building Supply for being our sponsor of the week this week and making everything possible here at Passive House Accelerator, including our podcast. Thank you too to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, and to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Emily Architecture, Partel, Rockwell North America, and Zola Windows. And thanks to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Cascadia Windows and Doors, European Architectural Supply, Facro, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, LG Air Conditioning Technologies, and Source 2050.
All right, as I mentioned, Emily will be familiar with, well, a lot of people will be familiar with Emily and her voice. But Zach, give us a little bit of background about why we wanted to have Emily featured on the podcast this week.
Well, yeah, I mean, Emily is a leading practitioner and also thought leader in the space of high performance building and building science and retrofits. She's also part of BS and Beer, which is I feel like is kind of a kindred spirit or even sister kind of effort to the Passive House Accelerator. Both BS and Beer and our kind of core piece of who we are at the Accelerator got started at the beginning of COVID so for the Accelerator, Sean St. Amour and Monty Paulson came to us and were wanting to share this a weekly series of Zoom events, essentially, that they had just started the first one, and it became the Global Passive House Happy Hour. This is literally the second week of COVID. And this bringing together people every week on Wednesdays to talk about Passive House, but also connect and, socialize as all of us were in lockdown was a really, really important moment for, I think, all of us in the community and certainly for Passive House Accelerator. And a parallel thing was going on with BS and Beer, with friends coming together in connection and community and talking about building science. And so we were doing the Global Passive House Happy Hour on Wednesday, and BS and Beer was doing their thing on Thursday. There's a lot of overlap between the two communities. So, and both, BS and Beer is going strong today, as is the Accelerator. So it's really great to have a kindred spirit and leader, community builder on. And then also Emily is part of our Reimagine Buildings Best of Retrofit conference that's happening on December 5th. So this is our 4-hour online conference that we hope that everyone will attend. And she is featured with Jake Bruton, who is the chief builder at Aero Building, and Andrea Michael, who's an architect at Love Shack. The three of them are featured in hour 2 of the conference called Proven Pathways, Case Studies and Solutions in Action. So we're going to get a lot of really great details about single family retrofits and strategies that you can apply to your projects during that segment. So it was really awesome to be able to have Emily join us for the podcast.
Great. Well, if you enjoy this, then definitely sign up for that, because this is a really great precursor and a really great deep dive into Emily's background and motivations and some of the fantastic work that she's involved in now at Mottram Architecture and more. She's a very busy leader in this field. So let's dive in. This is our interview with Emily Mottram.
Welcome, Emily.
Thanks for having me.
And can you just give us a sense of what Mottram Architecture does?
Sure. So Mottram Architecture is a full service architecture and design firm here in Maine, pretty much strictly residential architecture. And my passion has always been on the building science, low carbon, leading edge of high performance world. And so at Mottram Architecture, we're focusing on a lot of the ideas behind how to build better residential structures across the board. So that's kind of what we do here.
Very cool. And speaking of building science, you're also the host of the BS and Beer Show, which a lot of listeners will probably know that. You're also the host of the monthly podcast E3 Energy and Efficiency with Emily. For those who are not familiar, could you describe what those podcasts are all about?
Sure. So we'll start with the BS and Beer Show. In 2007, one of our local supply houses that was supplying better building products to our market. And for those of us who have been practicing during that era, know it was kind of like gainfully unemployed to be an architect at the time. The market was bad. And so, one, to help each other out, like, hey, I have a project, you have a project, good networking, and also give us access to like better building products that were out there. He started the building science discussion group in Portland, Maine. And that grew over the years into a monthly building science discussion group where we got together, we hashed out ideas. That's actually where the Pretty Good House book came about, where we crowdsourced ideas for the Pretty Good House book, which I can talk a little bit more about Pretty Good House later. And so we, as a local group, were getting together quite regularly, bouncing ideas off what works well, what doesn't work, how do we get together to impact change on like materials maybe we want access to, which was really fantastic. And it grew into a network where those of us here in Maine are all pretty close. And so when COVID happened and everybody was shut down, I had already had a practice that used Zoom. A lot of my clients don't live in the state of Maine while we're doing the architecture portion. And so I already had Zoom and I said, I have a Zoom account. Let's just get our group online and make sure everybody's okay. We can use this time to talk about how we do business or business practices, or we can get together and share ideas or talk about, building science. And so we got on, and for several years, people have been asking about our local discussion group. Like, oh, can you record it? How do we participate from far away? And we're like, it's not held in an environment that's great for recording, right? The acoustics are terrible. We talk over top of each other because we've known each other for a long time. Like, it's a great time. It's a great discussion group, but not really good for recording. So we're like, no, we're never going to do it. But so we hopped on Zoom just to make sure everybody was okay. That lasted for 2 weeks before people got word that we were doing this. And it was then the opportunity for people who have always wanted to come to one of our discussion groups to get a chance to join the crowd. And so it went from just our group to like 2 weeks later being a full-on webinar series. For the first 3 years, we did it every Thursday. And we have had some of the biggest names in building science come on, share their time, volunteer, talk about subjects. We've taken deep dives with experts in the industry. We have had ridiculous fun conversations where it's just, a discussion. We throw out a topic and we talk about it. So it's meant to be, the slogan for it is spreading building science far and wide and having fun while doing it. And so BSN Beer is kind of meant to make building science more approachable, right? We say, come for the beer, stay for the BS, like, had lots of jokes around it, but just to kind of help if you're new to the industry or you're a homeowner or you just think building science means more expensive, which we would like to, throw out the door just to make it more approachable. So when people started getting together in person again, we took BS and Beer to once a month because there's still plenty of places throughout the country and Canada and Australia, we have a group in Australia, that don't have a local chapter yet. Haven't had somebody who has like taken on that mantle and started a local chapter. But we did encourage people who loved this idea that like what works and why it started was because we got together locally, and as a group, we talked about what worked for our market in our area, what we would want to do. Because the United States is vast, and what we do in the Northeast isn't practical in other places, or you just wouldn't do it. And so we encouraged a lot of local people to get together and start their own groups. I think we are up to like 40 local groups through the US and Canada. So shout out to all of them who have started a local group. It is a fantastic time for you to also meet other professionals in your area, which is really great. The podcast, on the other hand, is kind of like an afternoon coffee with Emily, because I just interview people who I think are fun and cool, and I ask them cool questions. This last season, so season 8 of the podcast, was highlighting other women in the industry, like just bringing a voice out there. Like there are so many cool people out in the industry, both building science, architecture, and everything kind of in between, that I was like, this season, I'm going to highlight some great women who are builders or lawyers or designers or whatever. And so that was something that I did this year for this like past season. But essentially, it's just spreading more awareness to what is out there and making it easier for people to consume. BS and Beer is live Zoom show the first Thursday of every month, so people can join live. They can also watch the replay on YouTube afterwards. So we have over 100 episodes where people could watch the replay. It's not great as an audio only version. Some people do listen to it that way, but a lot of our guests show slides, which is kind of fun to look at. So then you think podcast is great because people can listen to that audio only, or you're not usually sharing a slide and trying to reference it, which makes you then want to go like find your screen. And, I've had people say, we just turn your podcast on the construction site and listen to it like while we're working on something, or like I have a long drive and that's when I turn it on. So it's just another media to get more exciting information out there. And for me, it's fun. So that's
Nice.
why I do it.
And is it just one other question about that? I recognize that BS and Beer is everywhere, but with E3, are you kind of focused in the Northeast or the US, or is it anybody who seems interesting in the world?
For me, it's anybody who seems interesting in the world. I think that we always have things to learn from other people, either other areas where they just do things differently. So really, it's just a lot of whoever comes across my feed who is interesting, reaches out, maybe wants to be on the podcast that I've heard about, that other people have recommended to me. And so I think that it is international, and I will talk to pretty much anyone anywhere who has cool ideas about furthering building science, carbon, and just a better built environment.
Very cool.
Well, yeah, that sounds great. And I really would like to sort of focus on retrofits as our topic to talk about today. And I don't know what percentage of the time the BS and Beer show is focused on retrofits or your own work. What percentage of your own work at your firm is new builds versus retrofits?
That's a really great question. One, the BS and Beer show, we just did this month, the episode was on retrofits. So very specifically started the conversation about retrofits. Like, where do you even start? How do you know what to do? Which I think is kind of a launching off period. And I think partially why, Passive House Accelerator is also doing this is we're going to start talking about retrofits a lot more. As far as percentage with our firm, it really can vary by year. So I would say over the last 5 years, retrofits have been a smaller portion of the work that we have done, simply because Building was going crazy, and a lot of people were doing new builds. As somebody who is in the built environment, concerned about how we provide housing, concerned about the carbon impact of the existing housing stock that we have, I would say it's our passion to do retrofits as well. So we always do both. I think we are headed towards a lot more retrofits here coming up. That's what we've been getting more inquiries about this last year. So we always have probably at least one or two retrofits that are going during any given year for us. We have had years where that is all we have done, where that's just the calls that we've had in, and we've had a bunch of really great retrofits. I love a good retrofit. I love to use existing space, to work with what we have, to, show people that they have something that can really work well and doesn't have to get bigger. I mean, I'm not saying we don't add additions, sometimes we do, but like there's just something really fun about a great retrofit. And in 2009, when it was considered gainfully unemployed to be an architect and to do new construction work, I did a lot of energy consulting and energy retrofits. So that was something that I did a lot of. I did energy audits. I gave people, kind of that list of like, here's where to start, here's what to do, here are things that group together, like here's how, because at the time they were maybe a little bit less concerned about the visual impact, but like really concerned about, energy. That was probably early enough before we were really talking about carbon too. I have always been interested in natural materials, so I think we were doing it in like without knowing we were doing it. It's just some good practice stuff with bio-based materials. But, kind of looking at those structures was something that I did when I was young in my practice because it was what was available at the time, but has consistently, I think, made me a better architect for new construction and has made it so that I've always really been interested in retrofits. And so we will talk to people about retrofits when they approach us. And I think that's an important part of what we need to do for quality housing in the US. So
And when they show up to, your client comes into the office and it's like, okay, I want to do a retrofit. What are like, are they driven by the idea of I'm going to reduce my utility bills? Are they like I'm looking for comfort because I have this older house, or is it kind of a combination of both that are really driving these?
I would say that most of our clients are driven by comfort issues. Some
Mm.
kind of, they are at the end of usable life on something, right? Like maybe the siding's got to come off and they're like, okay, like here's our opportunity. We're going to change the windows. And none of them like me because I'm like, oh, that'll be the last thing we do if we can do everything else. Like, but they usually come to us because they have a problem that they need to solve. And usually that problem isn't isn't energy so much anymore, not because energy is cheaper and not because they don't want that as part of the byproduct, but because they live in Maine has some of the oldest housing stock in the country. So like they live in a drafty house and like it's freezing in my kitchen, or space planning wise, I need to be able to like move around the structure, and that's our opportunity to do it. But we do start every project that is a retrofit with an energy audit so that we can holistically look at the house. Because if someone comes to me and they're like, "I want to do a kitchen renovation," and I go in your basement and it's wet and it's dirt, I'm like, I can't give you a new kitchen unless we can address some of the health and safety issues that you have in your house, because it's still going to be my fault if the brand new kitchen falls into the floor because it was, wet downstairs.
Yeah.
So we do look at health and safety issues. It's always my goal not to do any harm. That's something that you sign as an architect. It's like do no harm, like protect the health, welfare, and safety of the occupants. And so we take that to heart on our retrofits. Is that doesn't mean that I'm going to push you beyond what you can afford to do, but it does mean that we're going to talk about the existing house and how we can make sure that it's safe with whatever we add to it.
And yeah, and a lot of times it's hard to know what all the issues are until you spend a little more time with the building, which is can complicate your relationship a little bit with your clients, right?
It can. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people don't know what they don't know, right? Like they didn't know that this was an issue. They didn't know that this could create some other kind of issue. Like if we do this, then we're going to create this issue that you don't currently have, right? So one of those examples is that people are like, oh, I got to add more insulation to it. But when we talk like Pretty Good House, we talk about control layers first. And the first one is water control. Like if you don't control the water first, you shouldn't do any of the other things. And so we talk about water control, then we talk about air control. And I actually teach a sustainable design class at a local community college, and I make them do heat loss calculations by hand. And they're always shocked at the difference between 3 ACH, which is current code here in Maine, and Passive House at like 0.6. They are shocked at how much of a difference that air infiltration makes. But when you're talking about a retrofit, you could be sealing in stuff that, because the house has just naturally been leaky and drafty, hasn't been an issue for you thus far, but will be when we make it tighter. And that could be moisture, it could be radon, it could be, VOCs, it could be a number of things that you're creating a new issue for. So
Unless you figure it out ahead of time.
unless you figure it out ahead of time, which is why we want to go in, we want to say, we're going to do a whole energy audit. We're going to know what we're getting into. We're going to talk to you about the health and safety things. We're going to talk to you about our approach. My approach to architecture and building across the board has always been to educate, right? I'll give them as much education as they're looking for. And we have some clients who want to just understand that they will be comfortable in their house. And we have other clients who want to see the energy model I built, and they want to take a deep dive, and they want to have like that whole building science conversation, like deep in the weeds about every system or every piece that we have. And so we approach it at the level that our clients are at. And generally, to be healthy in their homes, they usually will either find the money to do something that needs to be done, or we pare back on scope, or we talk about it. And sometimes, and like this is always really tough, sometimes the answer is do nothing, right? Like I struggle hard when people with brick buildings come, because brick is so challenging in like a northern climate where it could get, that never has had any insulation before, and we're changing the insulation pattern of it. Now we could have spalling on the brick on the exterior. Like there's so many things that are involved. And so we try to think about it where we want to spend both our carbon and our energy and our resource dollars in smart ways. And sometimes that's not a smart way.
That makes sense. And I didn't realize you had brick up there. Like I wouldn't think there'd be a lot of brick construction up there, and I don't have an explanation why I thought that. I just like
Works
thought
great.
it
And
was overly insulated timber frame. Like, yeah.
we do. That's actually funny that you said that. One of our contractors is a timber framer, and he said he had someone show up at his shop because they were interested in timber frame, and they were like, "We just came to the land of timber framing." Like, how many people think that about us? That's funny.
I'm not alone. I have no idea where it came from, but it just popped in my head. I was like, oh, they sound right.
That's funny.
Yeah. So I guess going with a kind of more your just general approach to doing retrofits, do you usually have like a specific goal for certain performance metrics that you're like, this is like, essentially what I'm aiming for, and we can work around that? Or is every project kind of unique and you're like, okay, like it depends what you're going to come to me with first before I start, making kind of like proclamations about what I want done.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. And everybody hates this. I think I say it a lot, and people always hear me say it, but I think everybody says this, is it really depends. And I think in a retrofit situation, it depends on every single project, which is tough, because when you go in, you need to look at the building holistically, and then you need to make a plan for certain things. And then how you approach that is really different depending on the types of materials you're going to use, the extent to which you can get into it, how much you're touching or not touching. And that can depend on, you know, if you're doing a deep energy retrofit, maybe they have the money to do it. That's one of the pretty good house tenants, which is, to continue to make improvements until it no longer financially makes sense. And we need to be realistic that not everybody's financial budget is the same, and that it is People think that buying an existing house and doing a retrofit is cheaper, and I would like to dispel that myth. It is almost never cheaper to do a retrofit. You are almost always going to touch more than you thought you were going to. Every contractor will say, like, we didn't demo enough. Like, we could have demoed a little bit more, but every extra, like, inch, step, room you touch is just like one more level that you have to get into. And, people will say, well, I'm adding this much square footage, but it's like $1,000 a square foot. And I'm like, if you only look at what you're getting out of it and not all the other things you had to do to just get that one thing, right? Like, if I put a room on top of a one-story addition, I'm probably going to have to touch the one-story addition. That means I'm touching twice as much square footage because I'm touching the new part and the existing part. These things are all kind of connected together. So it's not quite as simple. And there's a point where you can't take it any further, or if you're doing a moderate energy retrofit, which is either approaching it from the inside or the outside, which you might do if you have asbestos siding, right? Like, if you can't take your asbestos siding off and we're approaching it from the inside, then, there are only so many things you could do. Or you're approaching it from the outside, but you have to address the electricity system because they've got knob and tube wiring that runs, through the house. Or so every project is a unique case study on that particular house, that particular occupant. So what's their goal on what they want to get out of it, and what's the amount that they can reasonably afford to maintain that structure, right? During the retrofit or in the future with the materials.
Right. Well, breathing new life into an existing building is, it's a great thing to be able to carry that building forward for another 50 years or whatever. But yeah, it's it's often more complicated. I won't say always, but often more complicated than people anticipate. And you mentioned energy modeling. So I'm curious, and you also mentioned that the state of Maine ACH 50 is a requirement. And is that for retrofits and new builds?
That is dependent on which town you're in and the level of your retrofit. So if you're touching a certain percentage of the structure, then you have to try to get it like up to whatever the current new code is. I would say across the board, it's not always like there's just not, sometimes there's not a lot you can do if you're only touching a small percentage of a structure. So 3 ACH is just the code. And so if you're doing a deep energy retrofit, you got to get it at least to code. But if you're doing a small retrofit or renovation or small to medium moderate energy retrofit, it depends on how much of it you're touching.
So for energy modeling, you mentioned doing that. Is there a specific program that you always use? And does the state of Maine require you to use a different program? Or anyway, which is what happens in California where I'm based, where you have to do both if you want to do any sort of passive house energy modeling. You also, although we're trying to get that changed, but anyway.
Yeah, so the state of Maine does not have a requirement. If you're doing upgrades through Efficiency Maine, they do have some, like, you have to do some stuff. I don't know that you have to do a whole energy model. And for a long time, they used BPI, which was really good for retrofit situations. It was maybe a little bit more geared towards retrofits. Through my trajectory as an architect, I went to architecture school. I've always been really interested in this idea of like consumerism and what goes to the landfill. My whole thesis was on that, revitalizing a industry and not sending everything to the landfill. And so like my dad is a dairy farmer, so I grew up in a farming community. Like, I grew up farm to table. I didn't know that was a thing in the 80s, but like that's how I grew up. And so like I think it's just always been part of my mindset. And so I started when I first moved to the state of Maine, and it was terrible to be an architect. Well, the first thing I did when I was living in Washington, D.C. was take the LEED exam. That was when it was only LEED NC, like super early, because I was interested in it. We moved to Maine, which is where my husband was from, and I got licensed as an architect. Then the market got really bad, and I started doing energy consulting. And so Maine had a Maine State Energy Auditor class. So I started there, did that. Then I went through the BPI training and I did BPI training. Then I got to be a HERS rater. And so I went through the training and I became a HERS rater, which is the software I use most often is Ecotrope because I am a HERS rater. And it worked best for what I was doing because the next thing that I did was Passive House International. And then like the next version, so I was a certified passive house consultant designer, and then I got the PHPP spreadsheet. I will tell you, I think Wolfie is easier to use than PHPP, but so then I had that. But when I was doing that, and I don't know if it's still true because I don't use PHPP anymore, but it felt very much like if you weren't trying to go for passive house, it wasn't the right fit for retrofit situations. Like it worked better for me to use Ecotrope and whatever. It could be different now. I'm saying that with the full caveat that I'm not the one that does that anymore. So, but in-house we use Ecotrope most of the time just because I'm still HERS rater. And it allowed us to kind of do different things, including where we're doing a lot of solar energy, right? So we had a good snapshot of what we were using, what our site use intensity was, what we could cover with our energy modeling, and give some pushback on Maine does not have a lot of MEP consultants. And so a lot of our HVAC is done by the installer. And so I wanted to be able to have something like I would never design a heating or cooling system from my energy model. But it was really good feedback on like they're saying I need 60,000 BTUs and my energy model is saying I need 10. Like, where's the disconnect? Like, how do we connect these things together? And as I've done more building science and I've hung out with more HVAC contractors and I've learned more about manual J and all these other things, like you can see how you get to a point where your HVAC stuff is like 2 to 3 times oversized for what you need. And so for me, that was just a lot more understanding of like, okay, what do we have? What systems do we have? How do we do comparison? So across the board, we pretty much do at least an ecotrope model for all of our projects. If we're going for passive house, we would do passive house modeling, but we would probably also work with a passive house consultant at this time, just because it's been a long time since I think it was 2016 when I took the PHI course. And so I want to make sure that whatever the most current news is, and so we do a lot of collaborating with other architects and stuff on that to work with a consultant that would work with our firm to make sure that we meet all the passive house metrics if that's where we're going.
Nice. I guess I'm gonna jump a little bit, but I just want like you've covered a lot, but I'm wondering if when you're doing modeling, like are you able to insert a lot of like bio-based materials into that energy modeling, or is that like a cup? I don't know anything about this software you're using, so that's why I'm asking. Like, can you modify by using different like inputs of different bio-based materials?
I think they are all starting to do that. And that's one thing that I didn't mention, which is big fan of Builders for Climate Action. So we run our projects through the beam calculator. So we also know what we've got for carbon, which the thing that's beautiful about that is like once you've established some practice rules for your own business, you don't have to continue to do it for every project because you have a pretty good idea of where you are. We are firmly in the bio-based camp. So generally we're looking at it as like, oh, here's this new material. What is it really? Like, what's it made out of? How did it like, have they looked at it? Have they researched it? Like, and so, I mean, we're using a lot of things that are going to be like timber HP, made in Maine, fantastic. We have access to several straw panel manufacturers, one very local to where our office is in Midcoast, Maine. And then, also in Vermont, which is close by for us. And so also working, if we're going to do panelization, which is a little bit more challenging in a retrofit situation, but I am going to talk about that at Reimagined Buildings, is if we're going to do panelization, there are some other companies like Geologic who have very similar mindsets like we do, like trying to eliminate foam or whatever. And so we are usually doing that because that's what we think is important. So.
Well, that is a perfect segue to what I wanted to talk about, because I want to, have you ever done a retrofit using offsite built panels, panelization? And if so, I'd love to hear about your experiences with it, the advantages and disadvantages, and any changes to your work process that you had to do in order to use a panelized approach. And by the way, congratulations on even having those choices locally, because that makes such a big difference.
Yeah, it really does. We lucked out. And as I mentioned, like what we do in the Northeast works because of what we have access to. We have a lot of wood in the Northeast. Timber HB is actually made as the byproduct of the lumber industry, right? So they're actually just keeping the wood chips from going into the landfill, right? So carbon storing by turning it into something else. And I appreciate that it has taken them a long time, or these bio-based materials, to like get into code to be able to use them, like have access to them. So it is a struggle, and it not being available everywhere is always a challenge. And so I am very thankful that we practice where we do because we have access to some of these things. But to answer your question, yes, it makes it really interesting. So when you're working with panelization in a retrofit situation, there are some challenges that are hard to overcome and some that are easier to figure out. And some of the biggest challenges are, how do you attach those panels to something that is existing, right? If it's an addition, we actually just had a fabulous meeting with Croft, which does straw bale panels. And I think he said in the European documents, they often call it like the squishy bits, right? Like what happens in the bits between these two things that like need to go together. They're two different, materials. And this one thing is built in the factory to extreme tolerances, and then you get it to the site and you have this existing building. And part of the reason why I mentioned earlier that existing buildings are really challenging is because usually by the time you get to an existing building, nothing is really squarish anymore, right? It's not plumb, it's not level, it's not square. So then you take this thing that is pristine because it was built in a factory, has pretty good tolerances, and you try to put it on something that is no longer square or straight or level, and then you have to attach it, right? So if it's coming with insulation in it and it's this whole sandwich, you have to figure out how to attach it. So the good thing for us is we used straw bale panels over an existing timber frame. The good part about that is timber frame with an exterior skin is kind of a common theme. People have been doing that for a long time, SIPS panels or, other bio-based, like hanging a sweater on the outside of a timber frame is kind of not super unusual. However, doing that in an existing timber frame where it wasn't planned for that from the beginning did add complications. We had to relook at the structure. Could we get this attached and posted down? How do we handle the overhangs? Do we have enough room to do the overhangs? This particular one also had skylights in it, and they had to go where the existing skylights were in the existing timber frame. So you had to be like as accurate as possible on an existing structure that was like drawn and then built off site and then put on here and then lifted into place. And the driveway is like a mile long, and panels can only be so big to go down the driveway. So it's not, and we lucked out because there was room to maneuver with a crane to make these panels work, right? So there are challenges associated with an existing structure and its squareness, level, plumb, and its ability to then take something that is not site built, can't really be adjusted. So like it's it's the stationary piece, and how do you move between two stationary pieces, where when you're stick building something, you can make adjustments, you can make changes, you can, figure that out. And so marrying these two things together is not always the most cost effective thing too, because you spend a lot of time making it work. So that's
Yeah,
my long
so
short answer.
now I'm thinking maybe it's because I haven't had lunch yet, but now I'm thinking of two Oreo cookies and then the cream in the middle, and you need to like is there what are you using as the cream in the middle to kind of like make the cookie complete and work, if that makes any sense? Because you have two very stiff pieces, and there's something that kind of like I don't know, blown in something that helps kind of complete the envelope so it doesn't have these big gaps.
Yeah, and I think it depends on what you're trying to do. Like if you're trying to work with a wall system and that wall system needs to be able to move, then you're talking like gaskets and squishy bits, which when you're using panelization, is kind of normal anyway, right? Because you have some kind of gasket that moves those things together and lets them kind of get tight, but if it's attached to something else, can it move independently of the other thing? When you're talking about like the roof panels, we didn't need the squishy bits because they created their whole thing, but we had to then figure out like, where does this overhang? Because on the same project, we also had, I think, 6 inches of wood fiber insulation on the outside of the timber frame on the walls, right? So we had these two things kind of coming together that we then had to like figure out like, how is it going to be more complicated if we do this? Do we ladder frame out so that we can extend over it, so that we can do all of those things?
Okay, so I have to ask, based on what you just said, was it worth it? And what was the reason that you went with the panels as your approach? And did that reason hold up throughout the project so that at the end you were like, yeah, it was a lot of work, but
That's actually it's really fun because the project, and I think this is worth talking about for retrofits anyway, is the project didn't start out as extensive as it was. But once we got into the existing structure, we realized that there was a lot more maintenance that needed to be done, and the homeowner was very interested in tackling that. It's also in coastal Maine, so it's windy, it, rains upside down, it does a lot of things. It's chilly if you're on the ocean, kind of in Maine. So it wanted to be a year-round house, but maybe had never been treated as a year-round house. And so we went into it doing an addition to it for a first floor bedroom, per the usual. Really got looking at the structure, realized that the existing structure needed to have a lot more maintenance work done. Looked at the timber frame and went, I guess I can see how it's like this, because the stuff is just only sort of tangentially attached to it. So like maybe we should fix that. So then we were, kind of looking at this idea of, well, we have a timber frame. We don't want to cover it on the inside, so we know we have to approach it from the exterior. And trying to figure out how to roof over a roof to make that work, to get to the levels of insulation that we need because it's cold in coastal Maine, and to meet code and to do better things. Also, we are very into vapor open structures, bio-based materials, just as a rule of thumb. This particular contractor also was very, very much into that as well, because we're starting to also learn that the materials we use are adversely affecting our worker force. So, like, we want to make sure that it's healthy for them to use it, right? Which changes how we approach some things, because I often joke, if I have to have you wear more than one or two pieces of PPE, it's probably not going to happen, right? Like if you have to wear a mask and you have to wear goggles and you have to wear a hazmat suit and you have to wear hearing protection, like it, maybe you'll wear two of the three if we're lucky. But so we are always looking to select materials that are both healthy for the occupant, healthy for the structure itself, and then healthy for the people who are installing it. So bio-based, it's kind of always our goal anyway. But for people who don't know or don't have the opportunity to work with, I think Steve Brick calls it fluffy insulation, or like vapor open insulation, is, although foam has lots of R value and not a lot of weight, oftentimes fluffy insulation that is bio-based is heavier. It needs to be thicker to achieve the same thing. So it was starting to get very complicated on how we were going to approach the roof. And we have a great relationship with the straw bale panel company. And I was like, this has to be possible. Let's talk about it. And they were like, we're in, like, let's try it. And so it was really fantastic relationship because they were willing to try something that was we hadn't done before. It was unique because it's on this retrofit situation. And we are like, this has to be possible. There has to be a way. How do we figure it out? And we're both really excited that we made it work. And in the end, I think it was a great solution for this project that actually made it less complicated than other solutions would have been. Could we have just put a bunch of foam on the roof and moved on? Probably, but none of us felt good about that decision, so we didn't want to do it. That's how we got to where we were.
And I'm assuming there's a correlation between how like bio-based something is and how healthy it is for workers. Is that correct? Or is there like one outlier where like, no, don't use that?
There's probably a correlation between those things. There are obviously some things that are worse than other things. And if you're cutting it up and it makes a lot of dust and you're inhaling a lot of that dust, and that dust is an irritant to kind of any level, it can be an issue. Caroline Blazowski, the healthy home expert, often says, like, if it has a smell, you can have a reaction to it, which is basically like everything. And so what we've learned with working with chemically sensitive clients is what people have reactions to isn't always the same thing. So like we can work to take petroleum out of stuff, to use less plastic, to use less foam, to use lower carbon materials. But if you run into a client who's allergic to pine, like it's kind of a problem for us,
Yeah.
like up here. And like that's great. It worked perfectly for one of our chemically based clients who knew they had a petroleum issue, multiple chemical sensitivities to petroleum. So we used pine, smelled like Christmas in that house. It was beautiful, board sheathing, board flooring, like wood, everything. Worked great for them. Tried that on our next project. Client was allergic to pine. But like not great at all. So
They learned this before, like,
unfortunately not. Unfortunately, they did not know that was the issue, and we didn't even for a while know exactly what was going on
yeah.
because they had been in some of our other projects, didn't have a reaction, were fine. And it was maybe a calamity of errors that happened, which was we were doing finished trim work in February. It was cold. They were cutting the trim in the basement. This is Maine. Most of our trim is going to be some kind of pine based. So that dust was actually in everything because it was happening like inside the house. So then it was swirling around. We had more ventilation. We thought it was because we painted the basement ceiling a dark color. And sometimes when you're not clear in your specifications, they'll swap out the base for your paint with something that has higher VOCs in it, and then they use some kind of thinner to put it on with the sprayer, right? So you have to be like very diligent about each piece to make sure that like when you specify a low VOC paint, that it like makes it all the way through all the pieces of that spec. And so we thought, oh my gosh, maybe we just messed up and like this happened. So we thought it was the paint for a while because it was worse for them in the basement. So we're like, gosh, the thing we did differently is this basement ceiling. So we thought it was that. And it's like, it can be very hard to figure out what the trigger is
Yeah.
for people. And sometimes it's not just one thing. So it can be really challenging in the situation. So eventually got to the point where we kind of got down in the weeds enough to realize, but like didn't know that going into it. So thinking you're making all these right decisions. So I can't say that across the board, every product is going to be healthy for every installer, but there are definitely products that are less good for absolutely everybody. Sort of like the whole asbestos thing. Like it was a great product, turned out not so great for like anybody who used it. So
And very expensive to get rid of.
very expensive to get rid of.
Emily, thanks so much for joining us on the Passive House podcast. Really, really great interview, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more at the Retrofit concert in a couple weeks.
Thank you for having me. I think talking about retrofits is super excited, and I'm so glad that Passive House Accelerator is going to do a whole series on retrofits. So I'm very excited. Thanks for having me on the podcast, and I can't wait for Reimagine Buildings.
And that was Emily Mottram, who is a very busy leader in this field and doing some fantastic work as an architect, but also, as we heard, doing some great, just outreach and communication, education as well around the place. Mary, let's go to you first. What were your highlights from that conversation?
Well, first of all, I just really appreciated her background in doing energy audits and the experience that that brought to her as an architect, and how important it is to really have hands-on understanding of buildings, especially when you're approaching retrofits. So I thought that was great.
Mm. As she was listing off all the tools and the history of going through from green building leads, then learning, coming across PHI, then learning Woofy, it kind of made me wonder whether that's what it takes to get up to speed with, real building performance and building science, and if there's a gap in standard architecture training, because it takes someone kind of motivated to take that on themselves and sort of discover all these things. I don't know if you got any thoughts on that, Mary.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that a lot of people can graduate with a degree in architecture without having this really integrated understanding of buildings and control layer, the importance of control layers
Yeah.
that she mentioned also. So yeah, I mean, some architectural programs really do emphasize that, but there are a lot that don't. So
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, it's a continual process. And Jay, you asked sort of questions about, well, both of you actually asked some questions about new products or getting back to more biophilic products. And she had some really good thoughts on that. So that's a continual process of learning, not just the performance, but also making buildings healthier. I really liked her I guess check on something on a material. If it requires more than two pieces of PPE, then it's probably not good for people in the house. It's probably also not good for the builders and the people installing it, which a lot of people don't really consider that much. It's something that I've thought about. We have very heavily treated timber here, and I see builders, young builders, cutting it without any protection, no gloves, no mask, and some of that stuff is kind of nasty. You don't want to be breathing it in or even having it on your skin for too long. But I thought that was really thoughtful and considerate, but it's also something that doesn't get thought about all that much. Jay, really anything that stood out for you?
The pine allergy was maybe the first time I've ever heard of that, which that's unfortunate for the homeowner there. But yeah, I think it's a reminder that just because something's natural doesn't mean it's necessarily healthy or you're not
Mm-hmm.
going to potentially be allergic to it. I again, this is more within the realm of medicine that I sometimes write in. A lot of people think that anything that comes from a plant is going to be good, and that is just not the case. So that's unfortunate. But I think one of the other things I want to go back to is kind of the importance of, she's getting all of these different certifications, and this kind of highlights the importance of continuing education, which is, I'm sure nobody in a professional field wants to hear that because they see it as kind of a pain where you have to constantly get accredited after the fact. But it really does keep you kind of on the cutting edge of, whether it's architecture, medicine, law, these are really evolving fields. And I think, she spent a decade at least going through different certifications just to stay
Mm.
at the head or the bleeding edge. And so yeah, I think that highlights the importance of doing stuff like what we do, the happy hour,
Yeah.
what BS and beer has done for so long, where you get folks together who are part of a group and talk about the new advancements and innovations, and that keeps you on top of your game.
Yeah. And I had a lot of respect for builders and designers who embrace the challenge of doing retrofit work, because it's hard. It's harder. And as Emily pointed out, it's often more expensive. People have this idea that, buying something existing and then fixing that up is going to be cheaper. But as she points out, that it's often a lot more expensive. That doesn't mean that it's not important work, and it shouldn't be done, because there's lots of other benefits of trying to reuse materials and resources that already exist. But from I guess a sales and motivation point of view, I thought at the beginning of the conversation, it was a really great question about what the main motivation tends to be. And I've been guilty of this, that as much as I'd love people to be motivated by purely energy efficiency, that's generally not the case in the real world. And people have a motivation to fix a problem or to upgrade a kitchen, and a lot of instances it's comfort is the driver. And I like the fact that Emily takes that and starts with an energy model, even though that's not what the client has asked for. It helps inform what can be done, and to maximize that opportunity of opening up the home where you're solving a different problem, but using that literally as a foot in the door to fix and highlight some other problems.
Yeah.
But that's kind of a harsh reality of trying to sell what we do, is that a lot of people aren't necessarily motivated by carbon or energy efficiency, or they might say they are, but in reality they want a nice kitchen and a comfortable home.
Yeah. And lower utility bills is nice, but I think at the end of the day that might not be enough to put some people over the line. So I think
Yeah.
starting at comfort is always a good idea.
All right. Any final thoughts before we close up?
Well, I just wanted to highlight what a great situation she is in with regards to bio-based materials, that she has in her backyard several straw panel manufacturers. She's got Timber HP making the wood fiberboard insulation products. So it's just exciting to see the market having developed in her area to enable it to make it easier to build high performance homes, either new construction or retrofit. So, good for her, and I hope that spreads to other areas of the country as well.
Absolutely. Yep. All right. Well, thank you very much, Jay and Mary. Zach, at the top, as you mentioned, Emily is going to be featured on the upcoming session at Reimagine. So I just want to give us a reminder about that and what else is coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this week is Thanksgiving week for us in the US, so we're taking a little break from our regular programming in the Passive House Accelerator. But next week we have our big online conference that's the culmination of a month of focus on retrofit. It's called Reimagine Building's Best of Retrofit. This is 4 hours of real projects and proven strategies that you can use in your work. So we're looking at single family retrofits and retrofits of very large buildings as well, and everything in between. So a really, really great program, including speakers like Emily. And we hope that you'll join us. If you can just head over to the PassiveHouseAccelerator.com website, and you'll see a banner at the top, and you can register for it and join us. It's going to be great. And it's also, we've applied for continuing education credits with AIA and PHI and FIAS. So it's also a chance to get those continuing education units that you need as a professional. So it's going to be great. Please join us.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much. Thanks again, Jay and Mary, and thanks all for listening. Definitely check all that out over at Passive House Accelerator, and of course, jump into Reimagine Buildings as well. Enjoy Thanksgiving, and we will be back again next week on the Passive House podcast.